The firelight made the broken pieces of ruby glow like drops of blood on the dark wood floor. Queen Elara kept her eyes on those glinting shards, not daring to look up at the man who had just dropped them. The silence in the royal study stretched so long she could hear her own heartbeat. It was just past 2 in the morning on a cold October night in 1723. The only sounds were the slow tick of the grandfather clock in the corner and the soft crackle of logs burning in the fireplace. Elara's fingers pressed against the hidden pocket in her dress where she kept a small knife. Just in case. The man across from her finally moved. King Theron bent down and picked up the largest piece of ruby, turning it over in his palm. His hands were shaking. She noticed that right away. The great King Theron, ruler of everything their eyes could see and more, could not keep his fingers steady. "This ring belonged to my grandfather," he said quietly. Not a shout, not a command, just a simple statement, like he was telling a secret to someone he trusted. Elara did not trust him. She could not trust him. His soldiers had killed her uncle during the rebellion 3 years ago. Her family still called him the tyrant king, the monster in the castle, the reason they lived in hiding. But here she was, standing in his private study at 2 in the morning, watching him hold a broken jewel. The room smelled like beeswax from the candles and old leather from the books lining every wall. A half-empty bottle of wine sat on the desk between them, 2 glasses untouched beside it. Neither of them had taken a single sip. "The Chancellor's spies were seen near the eastern gate this evening," Theron said, still looking at the ruby piece in his hand. 3 of them. My guards spotted their wineskin shoes. The ones with the cork soles. No one else wears those. Elara's stomach tightened. Everyone knew what those shoes meant. The Chancellor's men wore them so they could move silently through the castle corridors, listening at doors, watching through keyholes, reporting back everything they heard. The Chancellor himself had not held a real conversation in 15 years without someone listening nearby. And Elara kept her voice flat, uninterested, like she didn't care. Theron finally looked up at her. In the firelight, his eyes looked tired. Not angry, not fierce like the stories said. Just tired, the way her father looked after long nights planning things that never worked out. "And they were asking questions about you, Your Highness." The title stung. "Your Highness." He said it like she really was a queen, not the daughter of a defeated rebel hiding in a small house outside the city walls. Like she belonged here in this warm room with its crackling fire and its shelves of ancient books. "I'm not Your Highness," she said. "I'm your enemy. Remember? Your guards have orders to arrest me on sight." Theron set the ruby piece on the desk and pushed it toward her. "If I wanted you arrested, you would be in chains right now, not drinking my wine at 2 in the morning." Elara glanced at the untouched glasses. "We haven't touched your wine." "No, we haven't." He almost smiled. "Almost. We've been too busy pretending we hate each other." The truth of it hung in the air between them. For 6 months now, they had been meeting like this. Secret letters passed through a baker who didn't know what he carried. Late-night conversations in this same study while the rest of the castle slept. And always, during the day, the public hatred continued. She called him a tyrant. He called her a traitor. The Chancellor watched and smiled and thought he was winning. But the Chancellor didn't know about these nights. "The broken ring," Elara said, pointing at the pieces. "Was that an accident?" Theron shook his head. "I broke it on purpose. There's a hidden compartment inside the setting. Papers, names, evidence of what the Chancellor has been doing with the tax money for the last decade." Elara felt her mouth go dry. "And the ring is broken now because someone tried to open it before I could get it to you." Theron's voice dropped even lower. "Someone in my personal guard. Someone the Chancellor paid." The clock ticked. The fire crackled. Somewhere far away, a dog barked once and went silent. "He knows," Elara whispered. "He knows about our meetings. He knows someone in the castle is working against him. He doesn't know it's you. He thinks it's one of my advisors. That's why his spies are asking questions. They're looking for the wrong person." Elara finally sat down in the chair across from him. Her legs felt weak. The Chancellor had killed her father. Not directly, but through orders, through schemes, through the kind of political games that left no fingerprints. If he found out she was meeting with Theron, if he discovered they had been planning together for months to expose him, he would destroy everything. Her family, her friends, the small rebellion that had been her whole life. "We need more time," she said. "We have 3 days. Maybe 4. Then the Chancellor addresses the Council with his annual report. If we haven't moved by then, he wins. Permanently." The word hung in the air. Permanently. Elara thought about what that meant. More years of hiding. More years of watching her people go hungry while the Chancellor's warehouses filled with grain he claimed didn't exist. More years of pretending to hate a man who, in these quiet midnight moments, seemed just as trapped as she was. "I can get the names," she said slowly. "The ones who still support my family. They'll fight if I ask them to." Theron leaned forward. "I don't want to fight. I want a trial. Public evidence. The truth, for once, instead of lies. The truth." Such a simple word for such a complicated thing. The truth was that her father had started a rebellion he couldn't win. The truth was that Theron's father had responded with force instead of conversation. The truth was that neither of them had known about the Chancellor pulling strings behind both thrones, whispering poison into royal ears, turning friends into enemies. The truth was that Elara did not hate this king as much as she should. A sound cut through her thoughts. Soft, deliberate, the scuff of a shoe on stone just outside the study door. Theron's hand moved instantly to his belt. The dagger came out silent and smooth, firelight running along its blade. He didn't breathe. He didn't move. He just listened. Elara heard it too. Cork-soled shoes. The unmistakable softness of someone trying very hard not to be heard. Whoever was out there had stopped moving. Waiting. Listening. Theron's eyes met hers across the desk. In them, she saw the question. What do we do now? The clock ticked once more. The fire popped softly. And behind the door, someone breathed. Elara's hand found the knife in her pocket. Her fingers wrapped around its handle. Whatever happened next, it would happen together. The air in the study turned thick and heavy, like the moment before a summer storm breaks. Elara's stomach dropped so fast, she thought she might be sick. Every story she'd ever heard about the Chancellor's spies flashed through her mind. People who disappeared. Families who never found out what happened to their loved ones. All because someone heard something they shouldn't have. Theron moved first. He crossed the room in 3 silent steps, his boots making no sound on the thick carpet. Behind a bookshelf, his fingers found a hidden latch. Elara had never noticed it before, but now she saw the faint outline of a door built right into the wall. Old castles always had secrets. This one might save their lives. He turned and looked at her. In the dim light, his face was all shadows and urgency. He held out his hand. This was the moment. The point of no return. She could scream. She could run to the door and throw it open, pretend she had broken in, pretend she was still the rebel queen who would never work with a tyrant. The Chancellor would believe that. Everyone would believe that. Theron would be arrested, maybe executed, and she would go back to her small house and her small rebellion and her small, safe life. Outside the door, the spy shifted his weight. Cork on stone. A tiny sound that changed everything. Elara took Theron's hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and rough and urgent, and then they were moving. Through the hidden door, into darkness so complete she couldn't see her own hand in front of her face. The door clicked shut behind them, and suddenly the only sounds were their breathing and the rapid beat of her heart. "Wait," Theron whispered. His breath was warm against her neck. She could smell him this close. Leather and paper and something else, something sharp. Fear. Not for himself, she realized. For her. He was afraid for her. The thought hit her like nothing else had all night. They stood in the dark for what felt like forever. Through the wall, muffled but clear, they heard the study door open. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Someone walking around the room, opening drawers, moving books. The spy was searching. Elara held her breath. Theron's hand tightened on hers. In the absolute darkness, she could feel him trembling. Or maybe that was her. Maybe they were both trembling together. The search went on for what felt like hours. In reality, it was probably only a few minutes. Finally, the footsteps moved toward the main door. A pause, then the soft click of the latch closing. Neither of them moved. They waited, counted to 100 in their heads the way children do during games of hide and seek. Then they waited some more. He might be waiting, Theron breathed. They do that sometimes. Pretend to leave, then stand perfectly still outside, listening. Elara nodded, then realized he couldn't see her. Yes, she whispered back. I know. More waiting. The darkness pressed in from all sides. Elara's hand started to cramp from gripping the knife so tight. She forced herself to loosen her fingers, to breathe slowly, to think. When they finally moved, it was Theron who led. He knew this passage. His fingers found the walls, counted the stones, guided them forward step by careful step. The passage sloped downward, then up again. Cold air brushed against Elara's face, carrying the smell of old dust and something else. Incense, faint and faded. A door. Theron pushed it open, and suddenly they were standing in moonlight. The chapel was small and clearly forgotten. Dust covered everything. Wooden pews sat in silent rows. A simple altar stood at the front with a single candle burned down to almost nothing. Through a small window, the moon cast pale light across the floor. Elara let go of Theron's hand and immediately missed its warmth. She wrapped her arms around herself instead, suddenly aware of how cold she was. We should be safe here, Theron said quietly. No one comes to this chapel anymore. Not since my mother died. Elara looked around. On the altar, half hidden behind the dead candle, sat a small painting. She moved closer, her feet silent on the stone floor. The painting showed two men. Young, smiling. One had Theron's eyes. The other had her father's nose. Is that? Theron came to stand beside her. Your father and mine. About a year before everything went wrong. Elara stared at the painting. Her father looked happy. Really happy. The way he used to look before the rebellion, before the fighting, before he became the man who died whispering warnings about the king. In this painting, he had his arm around the shoulder of Theron's father. They were laughing at something. Friends. They knew each other, she whispered. They were friends. Best friends, Theron said. Since childhood. They grew up together. Learned to ride together. Fell in love with our mothers within weeks of each other. They planned to rule together, side by side, forever. Elara couldn't look away from the painting. Her father's smile. His easy posture. The way he leaned into his friend like he trusted him completely. What happened? Theron was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice sounded hollow. The Chancellor happened. He was young then, just starting to build his power. He saw an opportunity. A whisper here. A rumor there. A letter that said one thing delivered to the wrong person. He turned best friends into enemies so slowly they didn't even notice it happening. By the time they realized, it was too late. Elara's legs gave out. She sank onto the nearest pew, her whole body shaking. All these years, all the hatred, all the death. Her father had died fighting against his best friend. Her uncle had been killed by soldiers who should have been allies. And she had spent her whole life believing the king was a monster, when the real monster had been standing in plain sight the entire time. The rebellion, she said, her voice barely a whisper. My family died because of him. Your family died, Theron said gently, sitting beside her. Because my father died. And my father died because someone convinced him his best friend wanted his throne. We were children playing the parts they wrote for us. Elara looked at him then. Really looked. In the moonlight, he wasn't a king. He was just a man. A man who had lost his father the same way she had lost hers. A man who had been just as alone, just as scared, just as trapped. How do we fix this? She asked. Theron reached out and took her hand again. This time it felt different. Not urgent. Not desperate. Just connected. We start by telling the truth, he said. All of it. To everyone. The hour candle on the altar had burned down to its final inch. The wax was cold now, solidified into a pale white pool. Outside the small window, the moon began its slow descent toward dawn. Elara looked at the painting one more time. Her father's smile. His friend's arm around his shoulder. The truth they never got to tell. "I'm in," she said. "Whatever comes next. I'm in." Theron squeezed her hand. And for the first time since entering the castle that night, Elara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The cold from the stone floor seeped through Elara's thin slippers and wrapped around her feet like icy fingers. She had been sitting on the chapel pew for what felt like hours, but the moon through the window hadn't moved much. Time played tricks on you when everything you believed turned out to be wrong. Theron had found an old blanket in a chest behind the altar. He draped it over her shoulders without asking. The wool smelled like mothballs and centuries of dust, but Elara pulled it tight anyway. The warmth helped. A little. "I need to hear all of it," she said. Her voice came out rough, like she hadn't used it in days. "Every detail. I need to understand." Theron sat on the floor across from her, his back against a wooden pew. In the moonlight, he looked younger somehow. Less like a king and more like a boy who had lost something precious a long time ago. "My father kept journals," he began. Detailed ones. Every day, he wrote down what happened, who he talked to, what he thought about. After he died, I found them hidden in his private chamber. 3 years' worth of entries, all in his own hand. Elara pulled the blanket tighter. And the story they tell is nothing like the one we were taught. Theron picked at a loose thread on his sleeve, not looking at her. "The rebellion didn't start because my father was a tyrant. It started because he became paranoid. He thought everyone wanted to kill him. His advisors, his guards, even me. Especially me. Why? Because someone kept feeding him lies. Anonymous letters slipped under his door. Servants who mentioned overhearing plots. A guard who suddenly stopped meeting his eyes. Little things, day after day, year after year, until he couldn't trust anyone." Theron finally looked up. "Including your father. Especially your father." The chapel felt colder suddenly. Elara shivered despite the blanket. "In the journals," Theron continued, "you can watch it happen. Early entries talk about his best friend, how much he missed him, how he wished they could still talk like they used to. Then the entries change. Suspicion creeps in. He mentions a letter your father supposedly wrote, though he never actually saw it. He mentions a meeting that never happened, a plot that never existed. By the end, he truly believed your father wanted him dead." Elara thought about her own father. The last years of his life had been consumed by the rebellion. He had been angry, yes, bitter, but also sad in a way she never understood. Sometimes she would find him staring at nothing, tears in his eyes, unable to explain why. "He never got over losing his friend," she whispered. Even at the end, he talked about the king like he'd lost a brother. "They were both victims," Theron said. "The Chancellor didn't just kill them. He made them kill each other." Silence settled over the chapel. Outside, the first hints of gray touched the edges of the sky. Dawn was coming whether they were ready or not. Elara stood up suddenly. The blanket fell from her shoulders, but she didn't notice. She walked to the altar and picked up the cold, dead candle. Its wax had solidified into a sad white puddle around its base. She held it in both hands, feeling its weight. "I armed our enemy for him." The words came out so quiet she barely heard them herself. But Theron heard. "What do you mean?" Elara turned to face him. "Every rebellion needs weapons. Money. Supporters. The Chancellor made sure we had all of it. Through secret channels. Through people we thought were friends. He kept us fighting because a divided kingdom is easier to control." Theron stood slowly. "You're saying he funded both sides?" "I'm saying he created both sides." Elara's hands shook, but her voice stayed steady. "My father wasn't a rebel by nature. He was a loyal man. A peaceful man. But when his best friend suddenly started treating him like an enemy, when his letters went unanswered and his messengers were turned away, what was he supposed to think?" The Chancellor pushed him into a corner and then handed him a sword. The candle snapped in Elara's hands. She hadn't meant to break it. But suddenly it was in 2 pieces, the dry wax cracking with a sound like a small bone breaking. She stared at the pieces in her palms, then at Theron. "I've spent 10 years hating you," she said. 10 years building my life around the idea that your family destroyed mine. And all that time, the real enemy was standing right next to you, running your government, eating at your table, calling himself your friend while he murdered your father. Theron crossed the space between them. He took the broken candle pieces from her hands and set them on the altar. Then he took her hands in his. "Look at me," he said quietly. She did. In the growing light, she could see his face clearly now. The tired eyes, the lines around his mouth, the weight of years spent alone. "You didn't know," he said. "Neither did I." That's how he wins. By keeping us apart, by making sure we never compare notes, by ensuring we stay too busy hating each other to notice what's really happening. Elara's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "But we're complicit. Every day we spent fighting, every speech I gave about the tyrant king, every soldier he sent against my people, it all served him. We did his work for him." "Yes." Theron didn't look away. "We did. And now we have to decide what to do about it." The impossible choice sat between them like a third person in the room. Elara could walk away, go back to her people, tell them the truth, try to rebuild from there. But without Theron's help, without the resources of the crown, she would fail. The Chancellor would crush her rebellion once and for all, then turn his full attention to eliminating the king. Or she could stay, work with Theron, become the thing she had sworn to destroy, a queen who ruled alongside the enemy. Her people would call her traitor. Her family's name would be cursed for generations. But the Chancellor would fall. "What do we do?" she asked. Theron squeezed her hands. "We stop being pawns. We become players. Together." The first ray of sunlight broke through the chapel window. It hit the broken candle on the altar, the painting of their fathers, the dust floating in the air. For one brief moment, everything glowed golden. And then Elara realized the secret pact with the king she should fear was never about politics. It was about two people who had been lied to their whole lives, finally finding someone who understood. It was about choosing truth over tradition, peace over pride, tomorrow over yesterday. It was about looking at the man who should be her enemy and seeing, for the first time, an ally. "I have conditions," she said. Theron almost smiled. "I expected nothing less. My people get seats on the council. Real seats, with real votes. Their lands are returned. Their rights are restored. And the Chancellor answers for his crimes in a public trial, not a quiet execution in some dungeon." "Agreed. And in return, you stand beside me when I announce it. Publicly, as my queen." Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. Queen, not rebel leader, not secret ally. Queen of the very kingdom she had spent her life fighting. "The people will riot," she said. "Probably. Your nobles will refuse. Almost certainly. The Chancellor will try to have us both killed before sunset." Theron's grip on her hands tightened. "Then we better make sure sunrise counts." Outside, the chapel bell rang once. Someone in the castle, starting their day, unaware that everything was about to change. Elara took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "When do we start?" Theron finally smiled. A real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. "Right now." The broken candle lay in two pieces on the altar as Elara turned away from the window. The sunrise had painted everything gold for just a moment, but now the light was fading behind clouds rolling in from the east. Snow clouds, she guessed. The first snow of winter always came this time of year. Theron was watching her, waiting. She could feel his eyes on her back as she stared at the chapel door. "Before we walk out there," she said slowly, "I need you to understand something." "Tell me." Elara turned to face him. "I'm not good at being quiet. I'm not good at following rules or waiting for permission or biting my tongue when I see something wrong. That's why my people follow me. They know I'll say what they're thinking." Theron nodded. "I know. So if we're going to do this together, you need to let me be who I am. In public, in front of your nobles and your court and everyone else. No hiding in shadows. No secret meetings at 2 in the morning." She paused. "Well, maybe some secret meetings. But not all of them." For the first time since she'd met him, Theron laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of him like he hadn't expected it. The sound echoed off the stone walls and filled the empty chapel with something that felt almost like joy. "Deal," he said. "But fair warning, my nobles are going to hate you." "Good. I hate most of them already." Theron laughed again. Then he sobered, stepping closer. "There's something you need to know before we do this. The Chancellor isn't just powerful. He's patient. He's spent 40 years building his network. Every servant, every guard, every messenger, any of them could be his. We won't know who to trust." Elara thought about that. 40 years of lies. 40 years of manipulation. The Chancellor had started his work when their fathers were young men, and he was still here, still pulling strings, while everyone else lay in graves. "Then we don't trust anyone," she said. "Except each other." Theron held out his hand. She took it. "One more thing," she added. "When this is over, I want to visit my father's grave. Properly. With flowers and everything. I haven't been able to do that since he died." "I'll go with you," Theron said. "If you want." Elara squeezed his hand. "I'd like that." 3 days later, Elara stood in a small room behind the great hall, listening to the murmur of voices on the other side of the wall. The council meeting had been going for 2 hours. Through a hidden door, she could hear everything. The Chancellor's voice was smooth as honey. "Your Majesty, with respect, these reports of unrest in the eastern provinces are exaggerated. A few disgruntled farmers, nothing more. My agents assure me the situation is under control." Theron's response was calm, measured. "And what about the grain warehouses? Why are they still full while people go hungry?" "A matter of distribution, sire. The logistics are complicated. Perhaps if the rebel factions would stop interfering with our supply lines." "The rebel factions you've been funding for 10 years. Silence. Elara pressed her ear closer to the wood. She could picture the Chancellor's face, frozen mid-sentence, trying to process what he'd just heard. "I beg your pardon, sire?" "You heard me." Theron's voice stayed calm, but there was steel underneath now. "The rebel factions. The ones my father fought. The ones I've been fighting. You've been funding them all along. Secret accounts. Anonymous donations. Weapons shipments arranged through third parties in 4 different countries." "That's a serious accusation, Your Majesty." "It's not an accusation. It's a statement of fact. I have the records." "Your records? The ones you thought were safe." Elara's heart pounded. This was the moment. Everything depended on what happened next. Through the wall, she heard chairs scraping, voices rising. The Chancellor saying something she couldn't quite catch, his honeyed tone finally cracking. Then Theron's voice, clear as a bell. "Bring her in." Elara pushed open the hidden door and walked into the council chamber. 30 faces turned toward her. Nobles in expensive clothes. Advisors with ink-stained fingers. Guards with hands on their swords. And at the head of the long table, the Chancellor himself, his face the color of old cheese. She'd seen him before, of course. From a distance. At public events where she stood with the other rebels, shouting slogans she no longer believed. But up close, she could see him clearly for the first time. Old. Soft. With small eyes that darted around the room, looking for an exit that wasn't there. "You," he breathed. "Me." Elara walked to the empty chair beside Theron and sat down. "Surprised to see me here?" "I'm surprised to be here. 6 months ago, I would have killed this man myself if I'd had the chance." She nodded toward Theron. "Turns out, I was wrong about him. Just like my father was wrong about his father. Just like everyone's been wrong about everything. Thanks to you." The Chancellor's eyes narrowed. "This is absurd. The rebel queen, sitting beside the king? It's a trick. A Balyan. She's here to assassinate him. She's here to tell the truth," Theron said. "Something you wouldn't recognize." Elara stood again. She walked slowly around the table, past the nobles who shrank away from her, past the advisors who wouldn't meet her eyes. She stopped directly behind the Chancellor's chair and leaned down, her mouth close to his ear. "You taught me how to lie," she whispered. "You taught all of us. You made us believe our enemies were monsters so we wouldn't notice you picking our pockets. You turned friends against each other and called it politics. You sat in your warm house and ate your fine food while people died for your games. The Chancellor's hands gripped the arms of his chair. You have no proof. I have 40 years of proof. I have your records. I have your letters. I have the names of everyone you've paid, everyone you've threatened, everyone you've killed. Elara straightened up and walked back to her seat. And I have the truth, which, it turns out, is enough. Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall. Elara saw them through the tall windows, drifting down like feathers. Pure and white and clean. Theron stood. Chancellor Marcus Webb, you are hereby charged with high treason, murder, conspiracy against the crown, and crimes against the people of this kingdom. Your titles are stripped. Your lands are forfeit. Your fate will be decided by a public trial, where every word of your crimes will be spoken aloud for all to hear. The Chancellor lunged. It happened so fast Elara barely registered it. One moment he was sitting, frozen in his chair. The next he was on his feet, a small knife appearing from somewhere in his sleeve, moving toward Theron with surprising speed. But Elara was faster. She didn't think. She didn't plan. Her body moved before her brain caught up, stepping between the Chancellor and the King, her hand catching his wrist, twisting the way her father had taught her when she was 12 years old, and he'd said, "You never know when you'll need to defend yourself." The knife clattered to the floor. Guards swarmed. The Chancellor screamed something, but Elara wasn't listening. She was looking at Theron, who was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You saved my life," he said. "Someone has to keep you alive," she replied. "We have a kingdom to fix." Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, everything had changed. The autumn sun streamed through the tall windows of the study, casting warm squares of light across the polished floor. Elara stood in the doorway for a long moment, just looking. Everything was different now. The room where she had spent so many midnight hours in secret was open to the daylight. The heavy curtains had been pulled back. The air smelled different too, not of old leather and beeswax candles, but of fresh varnish and something green, like the gardens outside had finally found their way inside. A single ruby sat in the middle of the floor, catching the light. Elara walked toward it slowly, her footsteps quiet on the wood. When she bent to pick it up, she realized it wasn't just a loose gem. It was part of something. A new ring, still being finished, left on the windowsill to catch the sun while the jeweler took a break. She turned it over in her palm. The ruby was larger than the one from before and cut differently. Cleaner, brighter. No hidden compartments this time. No secrets. Just a stone, beautiful and honest, waiting to be worn. He wanted you to see it in the light. Elara looked up. A young woman stood in the doorway, dusting cloth in hand. She couldn't have been more than 18, with a shy smile and a stained apron. "The jeweler, the girl continued. He said rubies are meant for sunlight, not candle flames." Said the king agreed with him. Elara smiled. "The king has opinions about jewelry?" "Oh yes, your majesty." The girl's eyes went wide, like she'd said something wrong. I'm sorry, I shouldn't." "It's all right." Elara set the ring back on the windowsill. "What's your name?" "Martha, your majesty. I'm new here. Started 3 weeks ago, after the trial." The trial. 3 months had passed since that day in the council chamber. 3 months of public hearings, of testimony after testimony, of stories that made grown men weep and hardened soldiers look away. The chancellor had been found guilty on all charges. His sentence was life in a small room with a window too high to see out of, and nothing to do but think about everything he'd done. Some people thought that was too kind. Elara wasn't one of them. Living with what you'd done, day after day, year after year, that was its own kind of punishment. "Is it true you caught his knife?" Martha asked, curiosity overcoming shyness. "The chancellor's, They say you grabbed his wrist and twisted and the knife went flying. Something like that. They say you saved the king's life." Elara thought about that day, about how fast everything had happened, about how she hadn't thought at all, just moved, about the look on Theron's face afterward. "The king has saved my life too," she said quietly. "More times than I can count. We're even." Martha nodded like that made perfect sense, then hurried away with her dusting cloth, probably to tell the other servants that she'd talked to the queen, and the queen wasn't scary at all. Elara turned back to the window. Outside, the gardens blazed with autumn colors. Red and gold and deep, rich brown. The first leaves were starting to fall, drifting down to join the ones already carpeting the ground. 3 months. It felt like 3 years and 3 days all at once. She found Theron in the small courtyard behind the chapel. The same chapel where they had hidden that night, where everything had changed. He was standing in front of the painting of their fathers, which someone had cleaned and framed and hung on the wall where everyone could see it. "Good morning," she said, coming to stand beside him. He turned and smiled. That real smile she'd only seen a few times, the one that reached his eyes. "Good morning. How did you sleep?" "Better. The nightmares are getting less frequent." "Good. Mine too." They stood together, looking at the painting. Their fathers, best friends, turned enemies, now reunited in paint if not in person. Someone had left fresh flowers on a small table beneath it. Marigolds, Elara's father's favorite. "I talked to your mother this morning," Theron said. "She's settling in well. The servants adore her." Elara smiled. Her mother had arrived at the castle 6 weeks ago, hesitant and uncertain, still half convinced it was all a trap. Now she held court in the East Wing, telling anyone who would listen about how proud her daughter was, how brave, how she always knew Elara would do something important. "She asked when we're having children," Elara said. Theron choked on air. "She what?" "This morning. Over breakfast. Very casual, like she was asking about the weather." "Oh no." "Oh yes. She's already picked out names. 3 of them. Boys and girls both." Theron buried his face in his hands, but he was laughing. Elara laughed too, the sound bouncing off the stone walls and echoing through the courtyard. "I'm sorry," she said, "not sorry at all. You married into this family. You have to take the good with the chaotic." "Married into," he repeated, lowering his hands. "I like the sound of that." Elara felt her cheeks warm. They had stood before the priest 3 weeks ago, in this very chapel, with her mother crying happy tears, and his nobles looking confused, and the common people cheering outside. A rebel queen and a king, binding themselves together in front of everyone. The ceremony had been simple. No grand feast, no weeks of celebration. Just promises, spoken aloud, witnessed by anyone who wanted to come. By the end, half the city was crying. "I like it too," she said quietly. Theron reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "I have something for you. Well, for us, but mostly for you." He opened the pouch and tipped the contents into his palm. A ring. The ruby she'd seen in the window, now set in simple silver. No diamonds, no flourishes, just the stone and the band. "It's heavier than it looks," he said, holding it out to her. Elara took it. He was right. The weight of it surprised her, solid and real in her palm. Not a burden, exactly. More like an anchor. Something to hold on to when things got hard. "Will you wear it?" he asked. She looked at her left hand, then at her right. In the end, she slipped it onto her thumb. It fit perfectly there, snug against her skin, leaving her fingers free. "A warrior's fit," she said, remembering something her father used to say. "So you can still hold a sword." Theron nodded slowly. "I like that." They stood together a while longer, watching the autumn leaves drift down. The chapel bell rang somewhere above them, marking noon. In the distance, Elara could hear the sounds of the city. Carts rattling over cobblestones, children laughing, someone calling out prices at the market. Ordinary sounds. Everyday sounds. The sounds of people living their lives, unaware of how close everything had come to falling apart. "Do you think they know?" she asked. "The people out there. Do they know how much changed?" "Some of them. The ones who pay attention." Theron slipped his hand into hers. "Mostly they just know things are better. Food's cheaper. Taxes are fairer. Their kids can walk home after dark without being scared. They don't need to know the details." Elara squeezed his hand. "That's enough, I think." "Me too." A leaf landed on her shoulder. Gold and red, perfect except for one small brown spot near the stem. She plucked it off and held it up to the light. "1 year," she said. Almost exactly 1 year since that night in your study. A lot has changed. A lot has changed. She tucked the leaf into her pocket, next to the small knife she still carried everywhere. For the better. Theron turned to face her fully. In the autumn light, with the leaves falling around them, he looked peaceful in a way she'd never seen before. The weight was still there. It would always be there, but it didn't crush him anymore. I'm glad you grabbed my wrist that night, he said quietly. In the passage, when we were hiding. I'm glad you didn't let go. Elara thought about that moment. The darkness, the fear, the warmth of his hand in hers. I'm glad too, she said. I'm glad about all of it. Behind them, the chapel door opened. Martha appeared, breathless and apologetic. Your Majesties? I'm so sorry to interrupt, but the council is waiting. They said it's urgent. Something about the eastern trade routes. Theron sighed. There's always something. That's the job, Elara said, tugging his hand toward the door. Come on, let's go be royal. They walked through the chapel, past the painting of their fathers, past the spot where Elara had sat on that cold stone floor and learned the truth. At the door, she paused and looked back one more time. The candle holder on the altar was empty now. Someone had replaced the broken candle with a new one, tall and white and unlit, waiting for whatever came next. Elara smiled, then turned and followed her husband into the future.